very special that we have here in the UK, and something very special that we're going to share with you. Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz is a senior lecturer at JLE UK, but he has written many books, translated into many languages, and lectures around the globe on medical ethics, Jewish thought, philosophy, a medical doctor by profession, a soldier for the South African army in his past, but now one of the Jewish generals of Jewish philosophy and Jewish thought in our generation. And he is going to be spending the entire Shabbat. People from around the globe would pay thousands to be here, and that is why you have paid thousands to be here. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz. Please stand. For this session, we're going to ask you to please make sure that you have your phone on airplane mode or silent. Thank you.
I thought maybe for this session we could take a look at Torah itself. You know, that everything that you are committed to and everything that you are doing and the path that you have chosen, the commitments that you have made to be here, all the efforts that have gone into this program, your own personal lives, your own personal programs, and where you're heading from now, all depends on Torah. Judaism, Jewish identity, Jewish commitments, Jewish community, all the things you've been speaking about, all the things you are devoted to, the engine that drives all of them is Torah. And if you're not engaged in Torah, if you don't understand what that is, you don't have a deep personal relationship with Torah, your engine is not driving. You may be coasting, you may be moving, but at some level you will not be authentic. And therefore, let me try to share with you just one dimension of insight into what Torah is. If this works for you, if you're committed to Torah, if you have a beating heart of Torah knowledge, Torah growth, Torah commitment, everything else you do will follow. In your personal life, your personal growth, your personal development, marriage and family, your community work, all driven by Torah. Torah is the wellspring of energy that informs intellect, heart, action, and therefore, unless you engage that at a serious level, you'll be seriously lacking. I'm speaking openly because you've all made significant steps in your personal lives. You're not here just for fun, engagement, social reasons. We're all very carefully selected. In fact, I'm told that you are the black belts of this generation's intellectual young people. And I think that's probably true. And therefore, I think we can speak openly. If you intend to take your career further Jewishly, your level of personal commitment to Torah is something you have to work out for yourself. It's not my personal style to tell you, you must do this or you must do that. But there's one thing I will tell you you must do, and that's engage Jewish learning, Torah learning. To the extent that that's mature within you, the rest of your life will be mature and genuine. So let me share with you an insight into Torah from one perspective. You know, yesterday was the Yortzeit, the year after the passing of Rav Moshe Shapiro, my own personal teacher. He was the force behind a lot of the groups that you have come from. Many people in the world today, probably more than half of people working in Jewish community, Jewish outreach, Jewish inspiration, are his students. So I'd like to dedicate this to him and share with you some of the enthusiasm and inspiration and depth that I personally gained from him. But stay with me carefully, please, because what I'd like to share with you is deep. It requires thought, and it requires reversing some of our natural thinking. There's a well-known idea, and if you engage Torah literature anywhere, you'll find this idea. And the idea is that the world and the Torah parallel each other. The Torah is like a blueprint of reality. Let me ask, how many people here are English speaking? I mean, first language. Okay. How many hands, how many people are not English speaking? But you understand me, right? How many people are American? Okay, I'll speak really slowly for you. In whichever literature you engage Torah, you will find the idea that Torah and the world are parallel, like a blueprint. The way they usually express it is when a person builds a building, the architect draws up the plans, and then you work from the plans, and there will be a parallel between the building and the plans. That's well known, you find that idea everywhere. Many books written about that. But there's a depth of understanding of this, which I'd like to share with you, which shows that the conventional understanding, I think, is a little bit wrong. Here's the idea. The world and the Torah parallel, but not because the Torah describes the world perfectly. Again, here's the key. Focus, please, carefully on this. People think that the Torah describes the world. The Torah is unbelievable depth. It knows reality, it knows human psychology, it knows geography and geometry and mathematics and astronomy. And because the Torah has that depth, it can represent the world accurately. That's wrong. The correct idea is that the Torah causes the world to be the way it is. The Torah is not a description. It's not like a map. A map is a diagram that you can look at that describes the territory. The map's made after the territory. You see the land, you study it, you draw it out, you have a map. The Torah is not like that. The Torah was created before the territory. Here's the radical idea I'd like to share with you. The world looks the way it does because the Torah says so. This map came before the world. This map was created before the land was formed. The world looks the way it does because the map says so. Let's work through this together. You'll find this a very, very powerful idea. And a way of sorting out many misconceptions. And a way of appreciating the depth and power of what Torah is and what it means to be engaged in Torah. Let me give you an analogy. When you look at the genes, genetics, right? The genes describe the body. If you take a person with blue eyes and you analyze the cells of their body and you look at their genetic material, you will see that the genes code for blue eyes. Correct? Yes? Not? It must be that way. But the misunderstanding, anybody who says that the genes, imagine somebody taking a blue-eyed person, studying their genetics, and seeing that the genes code for blue eyes, and the person says, wow, that's amazing, that's unbelievable. They have blue eyes and their genes agree. Ridiculous. That's not the way it works. The reason they have blue eyes is because the genes say so. Is this clear? If you found the genes for brown eyes in a blue-eyed person, that would be amazing. When you see a person who has eyes of a certain color and you analyze their genes and you find that the genetic material agrees, it's not because it agrees. The genes came first. The reason they have blue eyes is because the genes say so. When you engage Torah and you find an idea in Torah that reflects the world, and you think, that's amazing, how did the Torah know this? The Torah didn't know it. The Torah caused it to be that way. The Medrash says that the Torah was written 2,000 years before the world was created. Whatever that means. 2,000 years before time began. But the point is that before time began, before time became, before the world became, the genetics, the Torah was written. The world looks the way it does because the Torah expresses itself in the world. You know that genetics are not simply a library of information. You know that the genes in the body are actually a machinery that produce what they code for. Right? A library simply has passive information. The books have the information, you can read them, you don't have to read them. Genetics are not like that. The genetic library in the cell of every biological cell is not a repository of information, it's a machine. That information has a mechanism for expressing itself. If you take the genetics and you let them run their program, they build the body. And if the genetic program says blue eyes, the body will have blue eyes. Here's the secret. When you engage the genetic material of the body or the world, you're looking at the reason that the world is that way. And of course, the incredible secret is, if you know how to manipulate that, you can change reality. And we'll get to that later. Are we getting somewhere? If you're not into biology, I'll give you another analogy. Let's say you go and see a movie. Now, imagine there was a movie kosher enough to go and see. Today, the movies are done digitally. But, not that long ago, they were projected. You went to a place, there was a screen, and on the screen there was projected an image from a film. What was on the film is on the screen.
What's on the screen? What's on the film? The Torah is like the film that a light shines through. Hashem shines his light, which is undifferentiated oneness. In Kabbalistic writing, it's called Ein Sof. He shines that light of Ein Sof through a film called the Torah, and that projects itself on the reality. So if you see something on the screen, and you're a seeker for the truth, and while everyone's watching the screen, you go up and you find the film, and you look on that film and you see that it has exactly the same pictures that you saw on the screen, and you say, that's amazing. It has the same pictures. You're a fool. Of course it has the same pictures. The reason that what you saw on the screen is there is because the film was that way. Is this clear?
Yes.
The two parallel exactly, but the depth is that the Torah comes first. The Torah is the reason. It's the genetics. It's the original source. You know, the Gemara and the Midrash say that when Abraham walked the earth, Avram Avinu, he figured out the Torah from the word. It was like an engineer reverse engineering a machine and figuring out the source. He looked at the world and he worked out all the mitzvot of the Torah. He figured it all out. King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, who lived after the Torah was given, figured out the world from the Torah. The Midrash says he sent creatures to the bottom of the ocean to fetch things that he needed. How did he know where those things were? He looked in the Torah. There's one Midrash that says he planted crops in Jerusalem that don't grow there, because he knew the lines of energy that run from Yerushalayim to every part of the world. And on those lines of energy, all the compressed essence of that country is contained. And on those lines, he planted the things that grow in those countries, and they grew here. If you know the Torah, you know the world. If you know the Torah, you know the body. You know the mind. You know everything in the world. Our great rabbis have... There's a famous story where the Chazon Ish, one of the great rabbis of the last generation, told Israeli brain surgeons how to do a difficult brain operation. He never went to medical school. I actually heard from a rabbi of mine who was a friend of a person who knew the brain surgeon involved in Tel Aviv, and he told me he was sitting with a cafe at Tel Aviv one day, and the surgeon said to him, how the rabbi knows Torah, I don't have any problem. But how does he know more brain surgery than me? And by the way, that surgeon said there was no way to do the operation. And the Chazon Ish sent him a diagram of, and that diagram exists today, by the way. It was published a few years ago. The rabbi sent the brain surgeon. You know, surgeons don't like to be told what to do. Israeli surgeons definitely don't. Not by rabbis, that's for sure. And instructed him how did the rabbi know how to do brain surgery and save the child's life? You know Torah. You know Torah, you know the brain, you know surgery, you know everything. Of course, you have to know it very deeply. This is not a simple matter. Genetics is a complicated science. But if you know one, you know the other, because the one parallels the other. And by the way, that works in detail. Every detail in the world is a detail in Torah. You know that the mechanism, the medium of Torah is called Hebrew. That's called Lashon Kodesh, right? That's the Hebrew language. That's why Hebrew is not like any other language. Other languages are only reflections, projections of the original language. But the language of Torah is the mechanism of creation. We say the medium is the message. Other languages, you cannot do that. If only for this, you need to study Hebrew. If you don't speak Hebrew, if you don't understand it, you cannot engage Torah authentically. Because you're looking at something that is, no translation's ever accurate in any language. Right, you know, the Italians have a traditional stuff, they say tradutore, traditore. A translator is a traitor. Right, but Hebrew, you definitely can't begin to translate. And one of the secrets of Hebrew is that in Hebrew, the word for a word, davar, is the same as the word for a thing, davar. Because everything in the world is a word that the Torah speaks. So when you read the Torah, you're looking at a library of information, and every davar, word in the Torah, projects itself into a thing in the world. So if you know the Torah, you know the world. If you want to study something in the world and know it deeply, go and find the word the Torah uses for that thing. You want to know something in the body and understand it thoroughly, go back to the embryological stage. You want to know that thoroughly, go back to the genetic stage. No doctor, nobody studying the body would be taken seriously unless you go back to the genetic material. No spiritual scientist can understand the world unless you go back to the word that the Torah uses. Because in every word in Torah, the shape of the letters, the numbers of the letters, the details, every grammatical nuance in Hebrew expresses something that builds itself into a reality in the world. This is a wonderful, the obvious example is davar, davar. No other languages are like that. Here in this room we speak many languages. Any language that you know in which the word for word is the same as the word for a thing? Hashem speaks the world into existence. He writes his thoughts in the Torah and they speak themselves into the world. This is a wonderful principle, by the way. I'll just share with you one application. Rav Dessler made this famous. What happens if you study something in the world and you want to know what it really means in depth? So you go back to the Torah and you find no word at all. There's no word. The secret is you've been watching an illusion. Something is in the world, but it's not authentic. If it was authentic, there would be a gene for it in the Torah. That is something that someone's painted up on the screen. They've painted it up on the screen of reality, but it's not being projected from the source. I'll give you examples. Many examples. In Hebrew, there's no word for nature. Nature. The word we use, teva, you'll never find in Torah. You'll find it meaning other things. It means to drown, it means to emboss an image. But you will never find the word teva meaning nature. Why? Because the correct understanding of the world is ein od milvado. There's nothing besides Hashem. It's all spiritual material. There's such thing as nature. What is nature? Nature is a self-maintaining, self-generating system of science and rules and laws. That's an illusion. Therefore, we don't have any word for that. If there was a word in Torah for nature, there'd be a thing called nature. And that's wrong. There's only divine, there's only godliness in the world. And therefore, we don't have a word for that. In Hebrew, there's no word for doubt. In modern Hebrew, we have safek and vadai. Certain and doubtful. You will never find those words in Torah. They are words that the rabbis made up. Why? There's no such thing as doubt that was created. Show me something that exists doubtfully. We have a problem. We get confused, so we name it. But Hashem didn't create that. And of course, if you broaden the discussion, there are many words that you can't say in Hebrew at all. There are no Hebrew words at all for adventure, entertainment, fun, romance, etiquette, chivalry. The things at the heart of Western culture. What is romance? What is romance? We have a word for love in Hebrew, that's ahava. Ahava is based on the word hab, which means to give. What does that teach you? That you love when you give. In Western education, you are taught that you love when you receive. Somebody makes you feel incredibly good, you love them. That's completely wrong. If somebody makes you feel good, it doesn't mean, if someone makes you feel good and you say you love them, you don't mean you love them, you mean you love you. What you mean is they are serving your needs. That's like saying, I love fish. What you mean is you're going to kill it and grill it and eat it, and you say you love it. You mean you love you, you prepare to kill for that. Love is when you give. That's why parents always love their children more than the children love the parents. Parents always love their children more than the children love the parents. You give where you invest yourself and you create and put yourself in. Therefore, the word ava means to give. Romance, you have no chance to give. Two people meet for the first time and suddenly bells start ringing and things go pink, and music starts. What is that? After you get married, about 2.5 hours after you get married. Love takes time to build. So we don't have a word for the illusion. In English, you have a word adventure. There's no Hebrew word for that. There's no word at all. All modern Hebrew words for these things are borrowed from other languages. What is adventure? Adventure is going out and doing something thrilling and dangerous for the sake of the fact that it's thrilling and dangerous. What normal person ties a rubber rope to his ankle, then leaps off a cliff to see how close he can come to becoming part of the scenery? I mean, we have a Hebrew word for that, meshuga. But this point is, what we're trying to illustrate here is that every word in the Torah projects itself into an aspect of reality. And therefore, Torah is the cause, the genetic material. Let's take the next step. And this is terribly badly misunderstood. Let me give you an example. I'll give you an example. Sometimes people say, you talk about Judaism and mitzvahs. Sometimes you hear people say, do you know what the real reason is for kosher food? Do you know why the Torah wants you to eat kosher food and not eat unkosher food? Health. Have you ever heard that argument? They tell you that if you eat pork has tapeworm, right? Historically, it's been very unhealthy, makes you very sick. Amazingly, Judaism knows that. Don't eat pigs. Shellfish that swim around at the bottom of the ocean, when they soak up all the schmutz, right? All the hepatitis virus and all the bad stuff. Torah knows that and says, don't eat the shellfish. So you read literature like this, they tell you the Torah is incredible, amazing, thousands of years of Jewish knowledge and Jewish wisdom. You live a Jewish life, you'll be healthy. Your wife will not get cancer of the cervix, and you won't get all kinds of diseases, and you won't get tapeworm. Why? Because the Torah understands reality so deeply. It knows reality. It knows what pigs are. It knows what shellfish are. And it tells you not to eat them. That's completely wrong. That's completely wrong. First of all, it's wrong because Torah isn't a health manual. It's true that it has benefits and side effects. It's true if you live a Torah life, you'll be healthy. For thousands of years, the Torah has been telling you that you need to eat olive oil and fish and a Mediterranean diet. Now they've come to realize that's the right kind of diet. Yes, of course, Torah has all that. But the Torah is a spiritual document at the source of reality. It's not a health manual. But there's something much more serious about that claim. Listen carefully to me. Follow carefully. You know why you can't eat pigs? Because they're unhealthy. Why are they unhealthy? Well, gee, I guess they evolved that way. That's how they happen to be. Why shouldn't you eat shellfish? Because they're unhealthy. They have a lot of hepatitis virus. Why? I guess they just happen to be like that. You hear the mistake? The world is the way it is because it happened to be that way. It's accidental. The Torah comes lately, looks at the world and says, don't eat those things. Wrong. The Torah branded those things as unhealthy and unkosher before they were created. Do you know why pigs have tapeworm? Because the Torah says so. Do you know why the shellfish hang out in the schmutz? Because the Torah says so. People think, you know what's unkosher? Because it's unhealthy. Wrong. It's unhealthy because it's unkosher. This little shellfish, when he finds himself being created, he looks at himself and says, gee, I'm a tameh fish, I'm unkosher. I better swim around in the schmutz. Are we getting someplace? Whenever you look at the Torah's wisdom and understand that it describes the world incredibly, you're making a mistake. The Torah doesn't describe the world. The world copies the Torah. Pigs have to be the way they are because the Torah says so. You know, it's the old story about the person who goes for a walk in the forest. And he comes across a clearing in the forest, and he finds an archer. And he notices that every single arrow is exactly in the center of every target. On every tree there are targets, and on every target there's an arrow, and exactly in the center of the target is an arrow. And he walks up to this archer and he says to him, this is unbelievable, I've never seen skill like this. The archer says, no, it's easy. First I shoot the arrows, then I draw the targets. Torah is not a description of the world. Torah is the cause, the reason the world is that way. No self-respecting pig could be other than the way it is. When people tell you that the Torah tells you don't eat this because it's unkosher, the deeper understanding behind that is the world, this happens to be unkosher. It evolved that way, it's accidental. The Torah describes it and knows it. Wrong. The Torah caused it to be that way. And there's so many examples. You know, the Gemara itself gives an example. The Gemara says that, the Torah says that there are only 3 animals that have one, you know, to be kosher, an animal needs 2 classic signs. It needs to chew the cud and have split hooves. So the Torah tells you, and the Gemara analyzes this, that there are only 3 animals of the one kind and only 1 of the other. In other words, there are only 4 animals on earth that have only one of those signs. Right? Like the pig, for example, it has a cloven hoof, but does not chew the cud. And 3 animals that are the reverse. There are only 4 animals in the world that have those signs. Only 4. So the Gemara says like this. When were those words written? 3,329 years ago. By the way, even according to the worst, most vicious anti-Semitic literature, the world's at least 2,000 years. The Torah is at least 2,000 years old. So over 3,000 years ago, somebody wrote the line that tells you that there are only 4 animals in the world like this. Who in his right mind could have made a statement like that? What human being 3,000 years ago could have written a statement that you will never find another animal with these, any different than these features? And for the last 3,329 years, no one has. Who could have written that? Let me remind you that 3,000 years ago, most of the world's surface had not been explored. Right? Most of the world's, there was nothing. This place, England, you know, it wasn't. 2,000 years later, there were people here running around naked, painted blue. Yeah. And I hate to tell you Americans, but, you know, there was nothing there. Everyone knows the only highly civilized society at the time was in South Africa, but that's it. The point is that people thought if you traveled too far, you'd fall off the edge. And in that era, somebody wrote, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses wrote, and the Gemara says this, was he an outdoors man? How did he know the world so well? And the answer is, he didn't know the world so well. He didn't make that statement because he knew that in the world there are no other animals. The Torah that he was writing was written before the world. He was involved in the genetic material of the world. The reason there's no other animal that has features like that is because no self-respecting pig could be like that. You will never find one. Not because you will never happen to find one. It could not exist if it's not written in Torah. Is this point clear? Are we getting somewhere? Yes? No?
Yes.
So let me summarize at this point. What we have said is, Torah is the genetic material at the heart of reality. It is not a description of the world. It is the genetic material that is crystallized and created and then projects itself into the reality that we experience. And of course there's a perfect correspondence. Right? Not because it knows the world, but because it caused it to be that way. When you study Torah, you're putting yourself into the genetic heart of reality. Right? You're looking at the formula. You're looking at the reason the world is the way it is. Speaking as a doctor, when you study embryology, you go back to a formative level. Nothing can be more thrilling than it. All the mysteries of anatomy, you study the human heart with all its peculiarities at an odd angle, and the vessels are twisted in a certain... When you see how it develops in the embryo, you see why it has to be that way as it unfolds and folds itself in that fashion. And now we're beginning to understand how the genetics cause it to be that way in the first place. What could be more thrilling? You take the human body with its weird features that the evolutionists tell you are simply accidental, non-functional accidental things, and you trace them back in their formative process, and you go back to a genetic code, you go back to a formula, something of incredible, exquisite elegance, and you see how it works itself out into the reality that you see. Torah gives you the underlying unifying principles, the mathematical rules, the rules of physics and chemistry and science. That's the thrill of studying Torah. Anyone who comes to Torah because they think it's a practical guide to the universe, it's a good guide for marriage, it's a good guide for raising children, it's fundamentally mistaken. And by the way, people who run outreach organizations and they teach that way, come to my seminar. This is good for your marriage. Come and study. Let's have a Torah lecture about how to raise children. We'll use the Torah for practical purposes. That's not authentic. It happens to be true. You'll have a good marriage if you observe Torah rules. You'll be able to educate your children correctly. It's all true. You'll be healthy as well. But that's not the point. The point is not that you study Torah because it's true, not because it will help you do something. It is a tool for practical use in the world as well. But it's insult to Torah to look at it only that way. This is what it is at root. You should be coming to Torah because it's true. Because it's an aspect of reality, not because it will be good for you. And by the way, if you use it only because it will be good for you, you won't understand it correctly either. And the examples go on forever. We don't have enough time. I'll share with you one famous example. The Gaon of Vilna points out that, there's a verse in the Torah, it occurs more than once in Nach, describes circles. Circles. King Solomon was given the instruction to build a circular pool, without going into all the technicalities and the Kabbalistic background. And when the Torah describes the pool that he had to build, it gives dimensions. And it says that it had to be, it says, V'kav, shleishim bama, a line 30 amot, and amma is about 50 centimeters, right? A line 30 amas has to be its circumference, and from lip to lip it should be 10. Right? So, in other words, this pool has to be 30 measures around and 10 across. There are three problems with this verse. The first problem is, when it gives the word for circumference, the Torah spells it one way and pronounces it another way. One of the mysteries of Torah is that we have a tradition that many times the word is written and pronounced differentially. It may be spelled one way and pronounced slightly differently. That's called Akiva and decree. We don't have time now to go into the depth of this, but that's one of the features of the text. In this case, the word for circumference is kav. Kav means a line or a circumference, but it's written kava, its circumference. So the differential here between the word for the circumference and its circumference, we say one, we write another. So the Gaon of Vilna raises three questions. First of all, why would there be a difference between the way it's written and the way it's said? And there are two other problems as well. 30 around and 10 across. What's the first problem with that? You tell me. That's not the first question. Come on, what's the first question? If I tell you, build something 30 around circumference and 10 in diameter, any common sense person going out to build such an engineering project will raise one question first, which is? No, that's not the first question. What? That's not the first question. Come on. What's the first question you would ask if I told you to do that?
Why?
What?
Why?
No. The first question is this. You're insulting me by telling me both of those measures. You don't need to tell me circumference and diameter. Is this clear? Anybody who knows basic geometry knows that if it's 30 around, it will be 10 across. Or if it's 10 across, it will be 30 around. No intelligent engineer needs to be told the diameter and the circumference of a circle. If you tell him both, you're insulting him. The Torah never has extra unnecessary expressions. Is this clear? And the second question is the one that you raised. The third question. It happens to be wrong. Because if it's 10 across, it cannot possibly be 30 around. Because if it's 10 across, it must be 31.514, etc. around. And if it's 30 around, it must be 9.876 across. Is this correct? You know about pi? So there are three questions that the Gaon, who is not only the great rabbi, but a great mathematician, he raised these three questions. Why is the text written the way it is with two types of expression? Why is the circumference and the diameter both given? And why is it wrong? And he answers a classic, now again, no time to go into all the details. He says this: if you take the word for circumference, kavah, and divide it by kav, right? You have your phones on you? Take out your calculator. Luke, come on. Take out your calculator. Divide 111 by 106. Kavah is 111. Kav is 106. Multiply by 3, because for each one we told there are 3 units. And what do you get? 3 points, read it out. 3.14159, etc. Says the Gaon, you want a very good mathematical approximation? Don't read the words, use the numbers. By the way, is there any other system in the world where you can give a verbal description of something and then turn the words into numbers and you get the same thing again in numbers? You know, understanding the Hebrew language is enough to make you religious overnight. You take a poetic description of a bridge and then you read the letters as numbers and you get the mathematical engineering formula that describes the bridge. What other system could possibly do that? That's how Hebrew works. So you take these words and you transpose them into numbers, you get pi. Says the Gaon of Vilna. The Torah is telling you the mathematical formula, but its expression, the way we speak it, not the way we write it, the way we speak it's an approximation. 3 to 1, good enough. You know why, says the Gaon? Because in every engineering project, you always have to specify the tolerance. If you're building a table, a few tenths of an inch is good enough. You're building a 747, you've got to be better than that. Right? You know when the first 747s were built, they were designed on a computer. Discrepancy from nose to tail is less than the width of a credit card. And that's good enough. But if you're shooting for the moon, you can't afford a credit card. If you're shooting for the moon, you get that much wrong from here to there, you'll be zillions of miles off up there. Every engineering project needs the tolerance, the accuracy to be specified. And the Torah needs to do that too. Simcha Wasserman once told me, he says, this is where the Torah tells you how accurate your mitzvahs have to be. When you build tefillin, how square do they have to be? Naked eye, use a pencil, micrometer gauge. 3 to 1, that's good enough. It's about a 2% error. About a 2 to 3% error. The Torah is telling you in the same verse, mathematically is giving you a close approximation, verbally telling you a more loose approximation. The differential between the two is your level of tolerance. But people think, wow, that's incredible. There's a verse that knows pi. I've shared this idea with people. Unbelievable, they say. The Torah knows pi. You idiot. It's not that the Torah knows pi. No self-respecting circle could differ from that. Because the Torah says so. Is this clear? These are the eyes you need to develop. When you see something deep in Torah, you're not looking at an incredible wisdom that knows the world. You're looking at genetic material. When you look at the world, you should wonder how detailed and how accurately it follows its Torah instruction. Let's take one more step. So far, so good? Yeah. Any questions? No. The depth of Torah is when you study kosher animals, or you study circles, or anything in the world. You're looking at something that is a practical application, that's true, but much more deep. Much more deep. We are trying to align our neshamas, our souls, our intellects, with a true wisdom. Right? The fascination of it should be, even if there were no practical application, if you'll never need this in practice. The fascination is you're aligning yourself with reality. Rav Wasserman used to say that a person who knows Torah has an accurate picture of the world in his mind. He develops objectivity. By the way, you know, all these ideas in Torah can be phrased in a number of dimensions. They can be phrased technically. They can be phrased in understanding what we call pshat. They can be expressed in what we call halacha, that means halachically. They can be expressed in what's called Kabbalah, which means at a much deeper level. They can be expressed in what we call Musa. Musa means how the idea itself translates itself into character. They're all parallel. How do we understand this idea? Stay with me carefully for a moment. How do we understand this idea of building reality into an accurate picture in the mind? How do we understand that in Musa? Musa means personal development, refinement of character. This is the quality of developing objectivity. The first step you need to take on the spiritual path is to learn to be objective, to see things as they are. And what's the most important thing to see the way it is? You. Until you see yourself accurately, this is the great Kelm school of Musa, until you see yourself accurately, you know yourself for what you actually are, you cannot begin. Because everything you look at in the world will have the distortion of your own distortion, and you won't know that. You know, Rabbi Dessler said a most beautiful analogy. You know, the Torah tells us, the Gemara tells us, that people see through a lens. The Kabbalists call it an aspaklaria. It's a lens, you see through a lens. There was only one human being ever who saw through a clear lens. Who was that? Who? Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses. He saw through a completely clear and polished lens. Every other individual, even prophets, they see through a lens that has some sort of cloudiness, some sort of color, some sort of opacity. Only one person saw through a lens that is completely clear. Rabbi Dessler said the purpose of personal development is to polish your lens. To evolve, that means evolve a divestment of ego. To release your ego completely. So you look at the world as it is and not through the eyes of your own self-interest. And he said the most beautiful analogy. He said, when you look through a clear lens, you see what is. When you look through a cloudy glass, you see a reflection of yourself. And the dirtier your glass is, the more you see of yourself. The more ego you have, the more of the self there is in your lens, the more you see the world in your own image. And of course you don't know that. So the irony is the more egotistical you are, the more you think you're seeing objectivity. And then the whole world becomes a projection of yourself. And your deepest love in the world is only using someone for your own pleasure. And of course you think you're in love. The first step of a Torah process to develop objectivity. And our great leaders, Rav Moshe Shapiro, we began speaking about him. An unbelievable capacity to see the world as it is. And you see it, it's tangible. You can feel it. Ask him a question about your own personal life. You have an answer sometimes in 3 words. And suddenly all the clouds are dispelled. You see it's all gone. Right? Be able to focus, remove all the distractions. You know, he once said something very beautiful. He once said, you find that Torah is always given in a cloud. Torah is always given in a cloud or a mist. The Mishkan, the sanctuary, is covered in a cloud. Moshe Rabbeinu had to go into the cloud. The Torah was given on a mountain that was covered in mists and clouds. Arafel. Right? Always like this. It's very perplexing. Why would God reveal himself in something that hides? Abba Gershenfeld, did you ever hear him say this, Rosh Shapiro? Why would the Torah reveal itself? Why would God reveal himself in something that hides? And he said this, the Torah can only be appreciated when there's nothing else to be seen. When the material world is covered. When the world of the practical and the physical and the material, when that world is covered, you can begin to see. This is why you understand much more deeply when you close your eyes. The more distracting externality there is, the less you can see inwardly. And therefore, the Torah was given in a desert where there's nothing else to be seen. The Torah was given in no context. There's no context to Torah. Torah is the context. It's the kernel of reality that defines all context in the world. Let me take just one more step. I know you're all probably tired, you're probably jet-lagged. Let me just add one more dimension. We just came out of Hanukkah. And that is a celebration of the event in history that transitions us from what we call the written Torah to the oral Torah. Right? We've got 2 types of Torah. Torah shebiktav, the written Torah, and Torah shebaal peh, the oral Torah. What we call the Mishnah, the Gemara, the tradition that was handed down from Sinai orally, verbally. Let's call it interpretation, application, explication of Torah. We've got the raw code of Torah, which is super compressed. And then we have the verbal oral tradition, we call it the oral law, that is expressing Torah in all its multifarious refractions. Here comes the secret, and I'd like to share with you something so radical that's almost beyond human understanding. But we'll finish with this and stay with me carefully. We learned this morning, we said that Torah is the cause of reality. The way the Torah is, the world must be. It has to be that way. Right? Every animal must look the way the Torah says. All of reality must be the way the Torah defines it, because that's the energy. Nothing could appear on the screen unless it's projected from the source. Here's the question. Where's the genuine Torah today? And the answer is in the oral law. Torah is what the rabbis say it is. This is a wonderful principle that's called Lo B'Shamayim Hi. Lo B'Shamayim Hi means that the Torah is no longer in heaven, it's given into human control. One of our great sages, Rav Hutner, in recent times, he said, Chanukah is the Yom Tov of Torah She'Ba'al Peh. Chanukah is the festival of the oral law. You know, in Jewish history, there was a phase of the written law during which Hashem revealed himself openly in the world through prophecy and miracles. Right? The two always go together. And no miracle ever occurred in the world without the mediation of a prophet. Right? Every miracle, a prophet speaks God's words in the world, and a prophet manifests God's actions in the world. Those are called miracles. The two always go together. We call that the generation of Gilui Ponim. And if you make a map of Jewish history, here's 6,000 years, begins here, and ends 6,000 years later. And we are here. Right? If this is 6,000 years, we're standing 5, 7, 7, 8, right here. We have the privilege of the beauty of hindsight, of seeing all the prophetic predictions that have come true in exquisite detail, except the final pre-Messianic events. If you look at this span of 6,000 years, and you go back from where we are now, 2,350 years, you get to Purim and Chanukah. Purim and Chanukah are the time when prophecy and miracles ended, and we moved into the darkness of our set of generations. Before that, prophets were around. Hashem's word was spoken openly in the world. Miracles were occurring. There was no atheism possible. There was idolatry. Idolatry is a problem of too much sanctity, too much kedusha, too much desire to transcend. False intermediaries. But there was no such thing as atheism. Right? You couldn't possibly claim that there was no spiritual world when it was manifesting openly. Purim began to close that era. What happened at Purim? Purim is the first time in history you have a book of the Bible but written without God's name. Describes a miracle, but a hidden miracle. The king couldn't sleep, he had a wife, he didn't know who she was. One natural event after another. Purim means the luck of the draw. Esther means the hidden one. Wherever you touch Purim, you see it's a transition into the hidden world. And 150 years later, you have Hanukkah where you see nothing at all. There's no Megillah, there's nothing written, there's nothing at all. The only thing you have at Hanukkah is that after the war was won, a little candle burnt for some extra days. Nothing to do with saving the Jewish people, no prophet present. Right? Private, only the Kohanim saw it. Between Purim and Hanukkah, the world closed down, the light was extinguished. And then we moved from Hanukkah on into a world of rabbinic wisdom, where we make it up ourselves. You know, it always strikes me as amazing. What was the first rabbinic decision in the world? What was the first time a rabbi made a decision for the Jewish people without reference to prophecy? When was that? Hanukkah. Right? At Purim, there were still prophets around. Hanukkah, a man got up, his name was Matityahu, and he said, "Gentlemen, I've made a decision." They said, "Rabbi, what's your decision?" He said, "We declare war on the Greek Empire." They said, "Rabbi, you and whose army?" He said, "Well, there's me and my boys, you know, there's a few of us, we've got some old swords, I think we can do it." "Rabbi, did you ask the prophet?" "No, none of them." "Did you check with the Urim and Tumim?" "Oh, I haven't seen them for a long time." "Rabbi, what makes you think this, you know, hysterical, suicidal..." I think it's the right decision. and they won. We're talking about moving into the era of an oral law where the Torah is entrusted to the authentic hearts and minds of the Jewish people, and it is what we say it is. In our engagement of it, as you engage Torah, you chew it over, you assimilate it, you understand it, you come to conclusions within Torah. That's the oral law. Rosh Shapiro once said an amazing thing. He once said the oral law is only while it's in process. When the rabbis come to a decision, it's no longer called the oral law. You know that? He said when there's discussion in Torah, that's called the oral law. As soon as it's crystallized in the decision, it's already called written. Torah She'Ba'al Peh is the discussion. It's the dynamic. It's the process. It's the expression of heart and mind of the sages of the Jewish people. And therefore, we've moved into that phase. Since you're all black belts, I'm going to keep you an extra few minutes just to tell you something very, very beautiful. Again, this is sophisticated, it requires a little Kabbalistic background, but I'd like to share it with you. Do you know that Purim and Chanukah are the festivals that the Kabbalists call the legs? The legs? Why? Because history moves in a human progression. It begins with the head, it moves down in the body. Chanukah and Purim are the legs, and we start moving beyond. That's why Chanukah and Purim are called the post-biblical festivals. They don't have the sanctity of the biblical festivals. They already move outside. As the great Arizal says, the legs are outside the body. Where does the body end? Where birth takes place. When a woman gives birth, her legs are cold. The legs are out of the picture. Right? The body ends, new life begins. The legs are extraneous. The legs are the tools that move you forward. In Kabbalah, the legs are considered externally these tools, and internally your ability to have children. Because you walk from one place to another on your legs, and you walk from one generation to another on your children. That's why in Torah literature, a child is called a foot of the parent. And your children are your feet. And in Torah history, we have the same thing. We move through the body, prophecy, revelation, essence of body, and then we move into the legs. Right? Just to give you a clue, the Arizal says that when Yaakov was injured in his thigh, the beginning of the leg, remember Esau struck him and injured him on the thigh? So the Arizal says that at Hanukkah, Matityahu at Hanukkah began the correction of the wound of the thigh. You see the connection? Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, one of the great rabbis of Jerusalem, he says, Vayiga v'chaf yorechoi, and he struck him in his thigh. He says, Vayiga in Hebrew is the same numerical equivalent as the word Purim, and v'chaf yorechoi, it adds up to Hanukkah. Right? That's the gematria of those words. Okay, amazing. But be that as it may, let me share with you the Gemara that describes this. We'll finish with this. The Gemara says that when the rabbis were discussing, going back 2,000 years, a little less than 2,000 years, the rabbis were discussing a certain halachic matter. We're talking about long after prophecy ended, or sometime after prophecy ended. We're on our own now. We have to make our own decisions. The rabbis were debating a certain halachic matter. Rabbi Yeshua was the leader of the majority, and they disagreed with a great figure called Rabbi Eliezer. He was the great sage of the time. He's known as Rabbi Eliezer Godel the Great. He was a teacher of many of them present. He disagreed with what they came up with. He tried to convince them. He couldn't convince them. And eventually came time for a vote. They knew that he was greater than they were, but they didn't understand what he was saying. Torah has to be decided according to the wisdom of the heart and mind of the sage. You don't accept it blindly at that creative level. So it came time for the vote. He was about to be outvoted. What happens when you know you're correct and the majority reject you? What recourse do you have? There's only one thing you can do at that time. Prove that you're right. Correct? Prove it. So he proved it. He tried to explain it, they didn't understand. He said, I'll prove it to you. If I'm right, I want that tree outside to get up and walk. There was a carob tree, the tree got up and it walked 100 paces. The rabbi said to him, we don't bring proofs from carob trees. These were Litvaks, you understand, they were no Hasidim, there, I can assure you. But anyway, we don't bring proofs from carob trees. He said, if I'm right, I want that river to flow backwards. The water turned around and it flowed uphill. The sage said, we don't bring proofs on streams of water. That's not Torah. He said, if I'm right, I want the walls of the Bet Midrash to cave in. And the walls began collapsing. Out of respect to him, the walls began collapsing. Out of respect to Rabbi Shua, they remained suspended. The rabbis looked at the walls and they said, we don't bring proofs from the walls of the base Midrash. Eliezer said, if I'm right, I want a voice to be heard. A voice. You know whose voice? And a voice boomed out. And the voice said, what do you want from Eliezer? He's right in everything that he says. A voice, a divine voice, ratified Rabbi Eliezer's vision. Listen carefully. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yeshua Ragla. Rabbi Yeshua got to his feet and he said, Lo b'shamayim hi. The Torah is not in heaven, and they outvoted the voice. And the decision was taken according to majority and not according to the voice that boomed out from the higher world. Subsequently, one of the sages met Elijah the prophet, Olami, and said to him, what was Hashem doing? What was God doing when we took that vote? And he said, Hashem was smiling and saying, Nitzchuni banai, Nitzchuni banai. My children have defeated me, my children have defeated me. What is going on? What is going on? I mean, Torah is Hashem's Torah. Making it up. Hashem tells you what he wants, you outvote him. But I want to share with you one amazing insight. The great Kabbalist Arizal has an analysis of this piece of Gemara. And he asks only one question on the text. What's his question? I mean, you know, picture the scene. There's a tree walking up and down outside. There's a river flowing backwards. There's walls suspended. I mean, there's a lot of strange things going on here. The Arizal says there's only one line in this Gemara that's difficult to understand. The line is, why does it say Rabbi Yeshua got to his feet? The words are, Amar Rabbi Yeshua Ragla. Rabbi Yeshua got to his feet and he said, Lo b'shamayim hi. Why does it say he got to his feet? You see, the textual question is those words are unnecessary. Who cares if he was standing or sitting? Answers the Arizal, that phrase is the key to this whole Gemara. From now we stand on our feet.
The toe has come to an end in its manifest form. Now we move into the extraneous dimension of the legs. And if you think about it carefully, nitzchuni banai, nitzchuni banai. The simple translation is, my children have defeated me, my children have defeated me. But the deep translation is, netzach, netzach. Netzach is called the legs, right? Two aspects of legs, netzach and hod. This is where eternity begins. We now move forward in history. We become the legs of reality. So to speak, Hashem rides on our shoulders. This is why we are called the Makom, the chariot. And from now on, we take over. This is our creative element within Torah. And I'll leave you with this thought. If the genuine Torah now is in our hands, it means when you're studying Torah, you're working in the genetic aspect of reality from which you can manipulate reality. When the sages make a decision, they come to a decision in Torah. The decision is not an assessment of reality, it's a cause of reality. I'll say that again. When the sages debate a certain point in Torah, when they come to a halachic conclusion, the world looks the way they say. Why? Because they're the possessors of Torah. And Hashem has given the Torah to us, not in heaven anymore. When you're engaging in Torah, you're not only working in the genetic aspect of reality. You're splicing genes. You're working in the control room of the universe. You're actually seeing how the world operates and a high enough level of purity and power. Of course, our power is very small in this generation. But the principle remains, when the rabbis come to a decision, the world must look that way. I'll leave you with one example, and we'll close with this. And there are many. You speak to me afterwards, I'll give you references. You can research this theme further, but I'll just give you one that we heard from Rav Shapiro, and I'll leave it at that. Here's one example. The Gemara says, just a way of thinking here, a way of thinking. The Gemara says that in the time of the Mishnah, there was a man called Rabbi Chunya Chayfa Shechin. He was one of the contemporaries of the Mishnaic era. And he took for himself a particular mitzvah. You know, the Gemara says in Shabbos that everyone should hone to perfection a personal mitzvah. Very good advice, by the way. You have to do all the mitzvahs. But one should that you identify with deeply, that resonates with your personality, whether it's Shabbat or hosting guests or whatever it is, you should hone to perfection. In fact, the Talmud goes so far as to say over there that a person could inherit a share in the world to come because of this one mitzvah. And he took on for himself a very special activity. It was digging wells to provide water for travelers, primarily those who were traveling to Yerushalayim on the festivals. Chayfa Shichin, he dug trenches or wells, providing water. That's who he was. One day, the Gemara says, there was a girl. This was in the days of Chanina ben Dosa, the great sage of the time. There was a girl who fell into a pool of water. In fact, some commentaries say it was his own daughter. She fell into one of the pools of the father. Right? She fell into this. And as Gemara says that, she fell into one of these wells. And in fact, again, some commentaries say it was a well that the father dug, but it was his daughter. And no one could survive in that water for more than 3 hours. Right? Desperate situation. They tried to get her out, they could not get her out. After an hour of desperate attempts, they went to the great rabbi, they said, Chunya's daughter's fallen into the water, we cannot reach her. He said, Shalom. Shalom, no problem. An hour later, things were getting worse. They went back to the rabbi, he said, Shalom. Third hour, borderline of survival. They went to him and they said, desperate situation, we can't get out. He said, Kfar Alta, she's out. They went back and the girl had got out. Look it up yourself, it's an amazing discussion, how she got out, fascinating story. She was saved. They went back to the rabbi and they said, Rabbi, how did you know what would happen? Are you a prophet? How could you know that she would be okay? He said, Lo Navi Ani, I'm not a prophet and I'm the son of a prophet. Of course he wasn't a prophet. This is long after prophecy ended. But Kach Amarti Belivi, this is what I said to myself. I said to myself, is it possible that a man can labor in a mitzvah and have a child of his come to harm in that area? Doesn't make any sense. This man digs water for people, and his own daughter's going to drown in a pool of water? Impossible. Therefore, I knew she'd be safe. Says the Gemara, Afal Pichein, despite that, he had a son who died of thirst. This man, whose daughter was saved miraculously, he had a son who later died of thirst. So the Gemara asked the question, well, this doesn't make any sense. You told me that the man's daughter was saved because of his mitzvah of water. How did he have a son who died because of lack of water? He provided water for people. And the Gemara answers in a very cryptic and mysterious statement. Svivav Nisaramor. Around Hashem it is very stormy. That means Hashem judges his righteous individuals at a very, very exacting level. No tolerance is allowed for people on a high enough level. The question's obvious. If people are judged
great people judged so severely, right, that you cannot rely on being saved because you don't deserve it, what saved the girl? And if you can rely on this level, to the extent that the girl is saved, how come the boy wasn't? I mean, you see the question, it's obvious. One of the great commentaries, the Shita Mukabetzis, says this, again, a very cryptic statement. Listen carefully, this is amazing. He writes, the reason that when the boy was dying at first, the reason he died was because the great rabbi, Reb Chanina ben Dosa, was no longer alive. Let me explain. When the girl was dying in the well, right, the rabbi said she'd be okay. Sometime later, when the boy was dying at first, the rabbi was no longer alive. Rabbi Moshe Shapiro said, you know what it means? It means that when the rabbi was alive, and he said that a child cannot come to harm in an area where a parent does a mitzvah, no child like that could die. You know why? Because the rabbi says so. Believe me, it says nowhere in the Torah that if you do a mitzvah, your children will be protected in that area. And there's no deal like that. The contract doesn't say such a thing. But the greatest rabbi of the generation thought such a thing. His opinion was, this is not fair. Hashem's hands are tied. God looks down at the world and he says, my son Reb Chanina says that this is impossible. Lo b'shamayim, they outvote me. The reality is determined by him. But sometime later, when the boy is dying at first and the rabbi is no longer alive to think such thoughts and hold such an opinion, which is Torah, and it's no longer formative Torah in the world, then Hashem runs the world the way he sees fit. What do you see from this? You see that a Torah opinion, again, we're not talking about a permanent ruling in Torah. We're talking about a personal opinion. It's definitive and creative and formative in the world. The rabbi has an opinion, God runs the world according to the rabbi's opinion. That's what the oral law means. I once personally asked Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, I said, does this mean that the rabbis can create miracles in the world from their rulings? He said, not necessarily. This power declines over time, and ruling doesn't necessarily manipulate reality in a visible fashion, although if you go back far enough, they were able to manipulate reality as well, and by the way, that talent comes from the same source. And that's another discussion. But I'll leave you with this thought. Torah is a description of reality, but not because it describes reality after the fact. Torah is the genetic material that causes reality to be the way it is. The unbelievable privilege of learning Torah is not that you're looking at a map of the territory that was drawn after the territory. A wonderful, incredible, marvelous, accurate map. There are other sciences like that in the world. As science improves and theories improve, you can look at lots of systems in the world that more or less accurately define reality. Torah is not like that. When you look at the world, you're looking at a copy of Torah. The world, right, is the map. Torah is the essence. And therefore, all of you who've come to this event, you're all chosen because you've made your own personal commitments. You've all begun to see a glimmer of another world. Your incredible opportunity, your life story has led you to a point where you have this opportunity. All of you have many other talents, many other opportunities, many other life courses ahead of you. Take them, do them richly. But unless you engage Torah as the engine of what you are, right, nothing else will be genuine to this extent. And I'll finish with an anecdote. Something out of this world, in my opinion. Rav Shapiro was once talking in a class, and he taught the idea that the world has to break down completely. Completely. Before the Mashiach, before the Messianic reality can begin, the world has to break down completely. It's based on the Maharal and the Ramchal. Before the Messianic perfection, the world has to break down completely, utterly and completely. And Maharal says if you wish to build a new building from the bricks of the old, you cannot have 2 bricks left intact. Otherwise, the new building cannot be called new. Every brick has to be dismantled and deconstructed. Only when the previous reality is completely dismantled can a new building be called new. And therefore, the world has to break down completely. When it breaks down completely, a new reality can manifest. Someone went up to him and said, Rabbi, does that mean that the Balei Tshuva of this generation are hindering their new reality? Does that mean that all of us who are trying to be authentic and keep mitzvahs and learn Torah and do what we ought to do in the world and keep the world constructed, are we obstructing the Messianic beginning because we're not allowing it to break down completely? You hear the question? Listen to his answer. He said the Balei Tshuva of this generation are not called Balei Tshuva. They're not genuine Balei Tshuva. A Baal Tshuva is somebody who was correct, knew Torah, was observant, broke away, rejected it, became a traitor to Torah, and gradually, sometime later, found his way back in real repentance. That's called a Baal Tshuva. Today's Balei Tshuva are not like that anymore. Today's Balei Tshuva are people who never knew different. They were brought up in a secular model, had no idea what Torah was, and they're gradually seeing the glimmer of a light that attracts them, and they're moving in that direction. And here's what he said. The reason that the Baal Tshuva movement of this generation is not obstructing a new reality is because they are not Balei Tshuva reconstructing something from the past. There are people responding to a dawn that is breaking. They see a light in the distance, and they're responding to that light. Their accounts are not written on the accounts of this generation. The accounts of the Baal Tshuva world, people who are seeing a new reality moving towards it, their accounts are written on different books. They're written in the books of the dawn that is breaking a new reality. Don't worry for a moment that you're obstructing the coming of Mashiach. What you are doing has nothing to do with the world as it is now. You are responding to a dawn, to a new reality. You are invested in a new world already. Others have not yet seen that dawn breaking. They see the darkness. People who've begun this movement have seen a new world dawn. And their reality is inscribed there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our Tatzes here over the whole shoppers.